Under the scorching sun of the African land, where the majestic baobab trees rise proudly amidst the dry savanna, there stood a small hut on the edge of Baobab village. The hut, weathered by wind and time, was the home of Mrs. Miala, an elderly widow who lived quietly amidst the wild nature, with no family, no friends, only the wind, earth, and sky as her companions. She had once had a family, a home filled with laughter, but everything had been swept away in a severe drought many years ago. Since then, she chose to live alone, retreating into the quiet of nature, as if her heart had also dried up along with the cracked earth around her. Mrs. Miala was no longer young. Her back had curved from years of carrying water. Her hands were calloused from weaving baskets and gathering firewood. Every morning, she wrapped a worn scarf around her head, draped a faded shawl over her shoulders, and slowly walked over the cracked earth, her basket hanging loosely at her side. Her life was simple but peaceful, and she wanted nothing more than a little firewood to boil water and a few baobab fruits that fell with a sweet, tart taste. But one day, as she bent over to gather the dry twigs blown by the wind from the tall grass, she heard a strange sound. A faint groan echoed from somewhere near the old baobab tree. At first, she thought it was the wind rustling through the grass, but then the sound came again, clearer, almost like a cry for help. She stopped, listened carefully, and slowly walked towards the sound. Each step was heavy with the weight of age, but her heart pounded not from exhaustion, but from an odd sense of something about to happen. When she parted the thick, tall grass, she froze. Before, she was a small creature curled up on the dry earth among the gravel. It was a puppy with fur as white as snow, a color entirely out of place amidst the brown earth and withered green grass. It trembled, its wide eyes filled with fear, its emaciated body so thin that its ribs were visible beneath the dirty fur. Mrs. Miala knelt, her gaze soft as the evening sun. "What are you doing here, little one?" Her voice was hoarse from the years, yet warm in an unusual way. The puppy lifted its head slightly, its eyes glistening with tears, then lowered its head again as though it had lost the strength to trust in kindness. But Mrs. Miala didn't rush. She sat there, slowly extending her hand toward the puppy, letting it smell her hand, so it would know that she wasn't bringing any threat but warmth. It took several minutes, feeling like a lifetime before the puppy timidly moved closer and gently touched its nose to her wrinkled hand. "You will be called Tala," she whispered, lifting the tiny creature into her arms. Its body was light, like a bundle of dry straw, weak and fragile. "Tala, my little light." And so, a new beginning was written on that dry land, where a lonely heart had just found a beating rhythm, and a silent promise between human and animal that from now on they would not be alone anymore. Tala, that neigh echoed softly like the first ray of dawn, a fresh start for both beings who had known loss and solitude. When Mrs. Miala carried Tala back to the rickety hut, she had little more than a bit of water, a few dry pieces of cornbread, and the warmth from a heart that had been hardened by age. But that night, the hut was no longer eerily silent for the first time in years. The steady breathing of Tala and the soft rustling of the puppy, curled up beside the tattered blanket, brought a new soul into that space. As the days passed, love began to grow quietly. Mrs. Miala didn't raise Tala as she would a mere animal. She cared for him as if he were a child. Every morning, She would fetch water from the stream and use a cracked ceramic bowl to give Tala a drink. She would cook thin corn porridge, always leaving the majority for him, gently stroking his back whenever the weather turned cold. And Tala, with the sensitivity of an animal that once knew what it was like to be abandoned, responded with loyal eyes, a gentle wag of his tail, and by always following her every step. When the rainy season arrived, Tala had grown stronger, his legs no longer trembling, and he began to run and play around the hut. He helped Mrs. Miala in his way by fetching the small twigs she collected and piling them into a heap, or by sitting guard in front of the hut at night, his ears perked up, ready to detect any strange noise. Though his body was small, Tala's guarding spirit was as firm as a warrior's. On some nights, when the wind would whip against the fabric covering the hut, and Mrs. Miala would startle awake, she would find Tala already standing there, eyes focused on the darkness, ready to protect her from any danger. When she sat on the porch weaving baskets, Tala lay beside her, resting his head on her lap. When she was tired, the dog sat still, not playing, as if he understood that she needed peace. Mrs. Miala would often talk to Tala as though speaking to a real friend, telling him about her late husband and the children who were gone forever. Tala never answered, but his gaze was always attentive, enough for Mrs. Miala to feel she was no longer alone. Each day that passed was like a tiny thread weaving the tapestry of friendship, of companionship. Tala grew not only in size, his white fur becoming thicker and shinier, but also in the owo, as her ears, her eyes, and her second heart. No one in the village called her the old lady living alone on the edge of the village anymore. To the curious children and villagers passing by, Mrs. Miala was now the one with the strange white dog, always walking beside her like a shadow. Ah, the love between them didn't need words. An old woman who had lost everything and a dog once abandoned, two beings that the world thought had been forgotten by life, now created a tiny home together in the vast savannah, where warmth was given through loyalty, and where the light, the name Tala, truly shone through the simplest things. Tala grew quickly like the winds after a drought. In just 1 year, since Mrs. Miala had carried the white puppy from the grass, Tala had become a creature that made anyone passing by turn their heads. Grown, not just in physical form, with thick, snowy fur, strong legs, and a body taller than a 10-year-old boy, but also grown in intelligence. Tala was unlike any dog the villagers of Baobab had ever known. He didn't bark unnecessarily. He didn't chase chickens or disturb anyone. On the contrary, Tala's behavior was astonishing, as if there were a human soul within him. When Mrs. Miala forgot to lock the door, Tala would use his nose to push the latch. When she dropped her water basket on the road, Tala would pick it up, clasping the handle in his mouth and running ahead to the hut, waiting for her to catch up. At night, when hyenas echoed from afar, Tala would sit quietly in front of the hut, his eyes shining brightly toward the darkness, his ears perked in alertness like a silent guard. Mrs. Miala always said, "Tala is my son, not an animal, but a part of my flesh and blood." To her, Tala was not just a dog. He was her soulmate. He was the living memory of his family. He was the eye that helped her see hope. He was the legs that helped her walk roads that had become too hard with age. Every morning, Tala went with her to the stream. Every afternoon, they sat under the large baobab tree, where she would tell old stories that only the wind and Tala would listen to. But not everyone felt the warmth that Mrs. Miala felt. Rumors began to slip through the whispers behind Mrs. Miala's back quietly. "That dog, it's too big. I heard it listens to commands like a human. Once I saw it open the door latch, as if it knew how humans do it." At first, it was mere curiosity, then doubt, then fear. Some said Tala was the spirit of the forest, disguised as a dog to lure humans. The older ones claimed that in ancient legends, animals that were too intelligent were a bad omen. A child once mischievously threw a stone at Tala and fell immediately afterward because they tripped. And so the story became, "That dog carries a curse." Gradually, the villagers started to avoid Mrs. Miala. They no longer stopped by her hut. They didn't accept her offers of bread, nor did they ask after her health as they once did. She became a stranger in the very land she had once called home. Even the children who used to enjoy listening to her stories were forbidden by their parents. "Don't go near that hut. Her dog is not normal." Yet Mrs. Miala didn't blame them. She understood. People fear what they cannot comprehend. And Tala only knew how to love, to be loyal, and to quietly guard the small world of the two of them. Mrs. Miala still smiled every day, still wove baskets, still cooked Tala's favorite corn porridge, and still spoke to him as if no whispers were swirling outside. One evening, as the sunset bathed the sky in hues of orange, she stroked Tala's soft white coat and softly said, "Do you know, only when people have stopped loving do they start seeing everything through fear. But not me, because you are the most beautiful miracle life has ever given me." Amidst the silence, amidst all the rumors, amidst a world turning its back, there still burned a small flame in the straw hut, the flame of an extraordinary friendship between a woman and a dog, transcending all prejudices. Under the canopy of the old baobab tree, where Mrs. Miala and Tala used to sit during golden afternoons, only the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves remained, and the fading sunlight on the dry earth. This year, the dry season came earlier than usual. The sun was fiercer, and Mrs. Miala's strength was as fragile as the last thread being worn down by the scorching heat and wind. She began walking slower, no longer able to go to the riverbank like she used to. Instead, Tala would go alone, holding the small water gourd in his mouth, silently crossing the dirt path leading to the cool water. In those days, Tala was no longer the playful dog he once was, but a silent guardian, his sharp eyes watching every breath she took, his ears perking up whenever he heard the weak coughs coming from the hut. Mrs. Miala didn't need to call. Tala always knew when she needed something. A slight movement of her hand, a glance, or simply the sound of her breath short of air, was enough for Tala to understand. Some nights, when she coughed violently, Tala would run to her, carefully pulling the blanket for her with his muzzle. On some afternoons, when she lay exhausted on the bamboo bed, Tala would lie next to her, his large back gently pressing against her body, as if to share warmth. Day by day, the light in Mrs. Miala's eyes dimmed, but in her heart another kind of light shone brighter than ever, the light that Tala had brought to her ever since he was lifted from the tall grass that day. On the afternoons, when she no longer had the strength to weave baskets, she would sit leaning against Tala, telling him old stories in her hoarse voice, knowing that Tala could never reply. But his eyes always listened. Then, one evening, as the sun had yet to set, Mrs. Miala called Tala to her, her voice weak like a faint breeze. "Tala, come here, close to me." Tala approached gently, as if afraid to disturb the moment's stillness. He lay down beside the bed, resting his head on her hand. She reached out, trembling, and stroked his soft white fur, the same fur that had sheltered her through many cold, windy nights. "Do you know, some people say, I am lonely, but I've never felt alone since the day I met you." Her eyes welled up, as deep as a stream that had long been dried but was overflowing for the last time. She smiled a weary but peaceful smile. "You are the last miracle I have. If one day I'm no longer here, you must live. And live for both of us. Don't fear the world, don't fear the rumors, because your heart is more beautiful than any soul." Tala gazed at her, his eyes red. He didn't bark or whine. He simply nudged his head into her hand as if trying to hold on to each last moment. The wind gently rustled the thatched roof, and the evening sun stretched across the cracked earth, silently witnessing a quiet farewell. Only hearts and souls understanding one another, transcending the boundaries of language, species, and life. And when the final sunset of the day descended, Mrs. Miala closed her eyes, with a hand still placed on Tala's head and a gentle smile that never left her face. After Mrs. Miala's eyes closed, Tala remained by her side, his head gently rubbing against her hand, which was growing colder. He didn't understand what death was, only that the warm breath that had been there every night was now silent, and the gentle eyes were no longer open. The atmosphere in the hut became heavy, eerily quiet, as if even the wind was holding its breath to mourn. Tala lay his head in her lap for a long while, his large body curled up as though wanting to absorb the last warmth left. But then his instincts led him. Tala stood up, his eyes filled with worry. She needed help. Maybe someone in the village would assist. Despite never being welcomed by the villagers, despite the wary glances, Tala still believed that someone would listen. With a mighty leap, Tala ran past the tree line across the worn dirt path, heading straight toward the center of Baobab village, where the red dust still lingered in the dry air. But Tala didn't know. His image, the massive white dog, tall, intelligent, had long become a subject of gossip. There had been rumors that he wasn't an ordinary dog, that he brought terrible omens. So, when Tala suddenly appeared in the evening market amid the chatter and the scent of burning charcoal, everything immediately descended into chaos. "Monster! It's back!" a woman screamed when she saw Tala. "Run! It's here for revenge!" a young man shouted, swinging a wooden club. Tala stopped in the village square, panting heavily, his eyes pleading as he looked at the people backing away, retreating slowly. He tried to bark gently, signaling with his paw, lifting his head toward the hut on the edge of the village, as if to say, "Follow me. Mrs. Miala needs help." But no one understood. They only saw a large creature, its fur white as snow, eyes glowing like the sunset, an omen in their minds. Soon enough, a group of men armed with rough nets and ropes rushed toward him. Tala turned and ran, but he was tangled in the net within a few steps. The ropes tightened around his legs and neck. He struggled, panicking, barking loudly, but the more he resisted, the greater the villagers' fear grew. "Tie it up. Lock it in the old shed," one man shouted. In a cloud of dust, Tala was dragged into an abandoned wooden shed at the edge of the village, where old farming tools were kept. The door slammed shut, cutting off the light. In the darkness, Tala gasped, his body exhausted from being dragged, his heart racing, not from fear, but from knowing that he had failed. Mrs. Miala was still alone, with no one by her side. At the small hut on the edge of the village, the sun began to set behind the trees. Inside the humble house, the last light rays illuminated Mrs. Miala's kind face. She lay there, frail and small, with her hand still gently touching the cloth that Tala used to play with. No one came. No farewell words, no final glance. Only the wind silently slipping through the cracks in the door as a whispered goodbye to the kind woman whose heart had now stopped beating forever. On the other side of the village, in the cold darkness of the old shed, Tala let out a long, mournful howl, a sound that echoed, tearing through the sunset sky, piercing to the very core of the heart. In the faint light of the early morning, when the mist still clung to the thatched roofs, a boy named Lemo, about 8 years old with wide, curious eyes, crept toward the old shed where Tala was locked up. He had heard the broken barks from the night before, followed by soft whimpers like the wind, like a pain suppressed but silent. Lemo pressed his ear to the crack in the wood, holding his breath. Inside, Tala lay quietly, but what stunned Lemo was the eyes. Eyes that had once been bright, now clouded, glowing faintly in the darkness, and from them a tear silently fell, rolling down the thick white fur and dropping onto the cold dirt floor. "The dog is crying," Lemo whispered, stepping back, his heart pounding. The boy ran to find his grandfather, Elder Malku, the most respected man in Baobab Village. Elder Malku had witnessed wars, natural disasters, and even the tiny miracles of everyday life. When Lemo told him about the sad eyes and the tears of the animal trapped in the shed, he paused. "Dogs don't cry like people do," Elder Malku said, "unless their hearts are in pain." He grabbed his cane and walked out of the house without hesitation, calling for the villagers to gather. "We have locked a loyal creature in the dark," he said, low voice, "simply because we fear what is different." The villagers grew silent. They remembered Tala's eyes when he ran into the village, not with a fierce look, but a pleading, desperate gaze. A woman whispered, "Perhaps it came to deliver a message." The air grew heavy, like a damp blanket covering everything. Then, in a quiet agreement, a group of villagers moved toward the shed. The door creaked open. The sound of the hinges seemed like a late apology. Tala stood there, silent. He didn't rush out, didn't bark. He just looked at them, eyes thick with disappointment, fatigue, and a deep sadness that words couldn't name. The ropes that had bound him were loose by now, but Tala never attempted to escape. He had only been waiting for a bit of trust. Elder Malku gently approached, placing his hand on Tala's head. "I am sorry, son of the wind. We forgot that. Sometimes the most extraordinary thing comes from loyalty." Without waiting another second, Tala immediately turned and ran toward the hut at the edge of the village, the place where his heart had never left. The villagers followed, their hearts heavy with an unnamed fear. When they reached the hut, it was eerily silent. The morning sun filtered through the bamboo walls, casting a soft golden light over the old blanket. Mrs. Miala lay there, her frail hands crossed over her chest, her face peaceful, as if deep in sleep. But no one needed to ask. They all knew she had passed. Tala didn't howl, didn't cry. He simply approached, knelt beside her, and gently touched his nose to her cold hands, as if saying his final goodbye. A tear silently fell from his eyes. The villagers stood in silence, and in that moment, all of them, those who had once been wary, afraid, or doubtful, suddenly understood. Love has no shape, no color. It can appear in the loyal stance, in the desperate run, in the eyes of a creature we once misunderstood. That day, the people of Baobab Village lost a kind-hearted mother, but they found a lesson and a hero who didn't need to speak to be heard. Under the shade of the ancient baobab tree, where the cool shadow stretched like an arm embracing the earth, the people of Baobab gathered to say farewell to Mrs. Miala. There were no trumpets, no elaborate ceremonies, just heavy eyes, rough hands placed upon each other in deep respect. A simple white cloth covered the frail body of the woman who had quietly nurtured love, who had fought against loneliness and pain with nothing but kindness and a smile. Tala sat there, right beside the grave, his large body as still as a white stone in the wind. He didn't take his eyes off the resting place of the only one who had ever called him family. A soft breeze passed by, carrying the scent of wildflowers, lifting the old scarf of Mrs. Miala, the one she used to wrap her hair, gently over Tala's shoulder like a wordless mark. Elder Malku stood beside them, gripping his wooden staff. Today, we bury not just a woman, but a heart large enough to embrace what the world could not understand. She grew to love in silence, offering a chance to what we once feared. He turned to Tala, his eyes filled with sorrow but warmth. And you did not just guard Mrs. Miala. You guarded the very heart of this village, reminding us that nothing is stronger than loyalty and love without words. After the ceremony ended, the villagers approached Tala, no longer fearful, no longer avoiding. A young boy laid a wildflower wreath. An elderly woman whispered, "I'm sorry, Tala." The men bowed their heads, a silent gesture of deep respect. Tala didn't respond, only lowered his head, his ears gently drooping, accepting, forgiving. From that day on, Tala never left the base of the baobab tree. During the day, he sat on the mound where Mrs. Miala rested, his eyes quietly watching each step taken by the people of the village. At night, he would circle the village's edge, silently guarding the night as he once protected Mrs. Miala's peaceful sleep. No one told Tala to do this. No one ordered or taught him. It was a mission he took upon himself, a silent promise to Mrs. Miala, "I am still here, still guarding, as you taught me." As time passed, the village children began to approach him more often. They sat and played near the mound, chattering to him in their childish voices. Tala didn't play, but he always sat quietly, his ears twitching slightly, as if listening to every word. As time passed, people became accustomed to the presence of the enormous white dog as part of the village. When night fell, they felt more at ease hearing the heavy footsteps of Tala along the fence and seeing the white figure faintly visible under the moonlight. The elders called him the last guardian of Mrs. Miala, and the children called him Snowy Buddy. No one feared him anymore. Only stories passed down about the old woman who once saved a tiny white dog among the tall grass, and how that dog spent his life repaying her, not in words, but through actions, every day, every night. The memory of Mrs. Miala might fade with time, but the people of Baobab knew, as long as Tala was here, her love and kindness had never left. Tala was not just a pet. He was a living witness to unconditional love. Without words, without formal training, he understood and chose to act with his heart. The story of Mrs. Miala and Tala shows that sometimes healing doesn't come from medicine or comforting words. It comes from the silent, loyal, and loving presence. Friendship, loyalty, and forgiveness, will always be the most significant values, even when they come from a dog who cannot speak. If you enjoyed this story, please like and leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss other touching stories about courage, survival, and the miraculous bonds between humans and animals.